Hi everyone, Wismeril here. Continuing the series of speed farming videos, today we are exploring the shocking efficiency of the ball lightning build. Is this build able to speed farm tier 70 plus under 3 minutes on a good map? Let's find out. What I have crafted for you today is the most optimal version of ball lightning I could come up with. I have spent a considerable amount of time testing items, mechanics, variants, comparing numbers, and perfecting the build to what I'm going to show you now. I like to make very detailed build guides, which usually results in longer videos, so feel free to use the timestamps below to jump into the sections you want to watch first. Also, if you feel the pace of my voice is either too slow or too fast, I recommend speeding up or slowing down the video by 25% or more to align with the speed at which you enjoy processing information. First and foremost, let's talk mana management. Ball Lightning is the most expensive spell of the entire Sorcerer kit. At 50 mana per cast, if you want to run a Ball Lightning build, you really need to solve the mana issue before anything. We're going to play this build with a generator and a spender. Ball Lightning is our only spender, and as a generator, we're using Chain Lightning. Yes, you heard it right. We are using a spender as our generator. Patch 1.1.1 made Chain Lightning the best generator for the Sorcerer class. Nothing else comes remotely close. Thanks to the update of the Recharging and the Unbroken Tether legendaries, under the right setup, Chain Lightning is going to produce more mana than it costs to cast it, making it a generator. In fact, Chain Lightning is so good as a generator that we're going to make full use of the Elementalist legendary. It reads, Core or Mastery skills cast at or above 100 mana gain a plus 40% increase critical strike chance. Chain Lightning is a core skill, Ball Lightning is a mastery skill, and this setup I have for you today, if played correctly, will allow you to permanently benefit from the Elementalist legendary on every single cast of Ball Lightning and Chain Lightning. Now how do we do that? We need three things: maximum mana, mana generation, and mana cost reduction. You need max mana because the first casts of Chain Lightning and Ball Lightning need to be in Elementalist territory before mana generation starts to kick in. The paralyzing rare and magic nodes from the Static Surge Paragon board will provide plus 16 max mana. The Reservoir, rare and magic nodes from the Elemental Summoner Paragon board will provide plus 20 max mana, and the max mana roll on our helm will provide up to 20 maximum mana. This will make our max mana between 144 and 156 depending on our helm roll. We're going to want mana cost reduction on our amulet, boots and offhand. Those rolls are multiplicative to each other and will provide up to 38.6% resource cost reduction. On a maxed out character, this will reduce a cast of Ball Lightning to around 31 mana and a cast of Chain Lightning to around 22 mana. Don't worry, you don't need a maxed out character to assemble this build. I have made a highly customizable setup for you that you can adjust depending on how well your gear is rolled. More on that later. Last but not least, we need mana generation. This affix can only roll on rings and offhand and is highly desirable in this setup. The rolls are multiplicative to each other, but unlike mana cost reduction, they don't have diminishing returns. The more you have, the better it gets. Basically, in Diablo 4, the more you reduce something, the less you get from each source. But the more you increase something, the more you get from each source. Anyway, those three rolls of resource generation can increase the mana we generate by up to 66.5%. For instance, A 3 mana recharging legendary will now generate 3 times 1.665 equals 4.995, so around 2 mana more. This is huge. This stat is very important. On a codex version of the recharging legendary, a 1.5 mana ring now generates 1.5 times 1.665 equals 2.4975, so around 2.5 mana per bounce. This stat can turn your poorest legendary into a nearly maxed out one. The recharging legendary is only one of the 3 sources of mana generation I have included in this build. We're also running the invigorating conduit node from our skill tree, which provides 12 mana every time we pick up Crackling Energy. With maxed out mana generation, this node generates instead 12 times 1.665 equals 19.98, so around 20 mana. And finally, on the Paragon node, we are running the Static Surge legendary node, which restores 10 mana per close enemy we stun. Once again, if we factor in maxed out resource generation rolls, 10 times 1.665 equals 16.65. So that's 16.5 mana per close enemy we stun. This is huge. Okay, now let me tell you folks one thing. This setup is overkill on the mana generation front. Why did I do that? For 2 reasons. First, because most of you guys might not have the perfect roll on their recharging ring and might not even have mana generation rolls on their rings and offhand. Therefore, even with piss poor gear, you can assemble this build. Second, it might take you some time to get used to this elementalist territory thing where you only want to cast ball lightning and chain lightning above 100 mana, so having more mana generation than you need will help you output maximum damage before you start to cut unneeded resource generation. Now, if you have perfect gear and are a great player, don't worry, I got you covered. The last section of this video will show you the perfect setup on a maxed out character. By the way, why is it so important to benefit from the Elementalist Legendary? Well, speed farming lightning builds on the Sorcerer class typically struggle to have decent uptime on Vulnerable. We don't want a clunky build that tries to include Vulnerable at the cost of dungeon clear time. We want a fast build that hits like a truck. So I completely cut low vulnerable uptime from this build and maxed out critical strike damage. Permanent critical strike hits on ball lightning is what makes us hit very hard with this build. Now how about chain lightning? In this build, chain lightning is also a damage dealer, but doesn't output as much damage as ball lightning because of the mechanics behind each of those spells. Chain lightning can only hit 5 to 9 targets per cast, while ball lightning hits a target from 3 to 10 times a second depending on attack speed, and it lasts for 5 seconds on a single cast. Nevertheless, since we have chain lightning generating mana for us, we might as well have it deal damage, and having it constantly critting certainly helps. Beyond damage, having chain lightning crit helps a lot on the mana generation front, because we are running the destructive chain lightning node on our skill tree. Every time chain lightning crits, it has a 30% chance to form a Crackling Energy, which restores mana as we pick it up. This is why we want to permanently benefit from plus 40% crit chance on both ball lightning and chain lightning. On a maxed out character, you can have 43.6% crit chance from gear rolls and paragon stats, added to our base 5% and to the 40% from Elementalist, we can reach up to 88.6% crit chance on cast. And don't forget that Chain Lightning gains plus 3% increased crit chance per bounce. On a maxed out character, we'll be critically striking the vast majority of the time. Right, now that you know how the build works on paper, how do you actually play it yourself? Before you start blasting, you need to have a visual indicator on your mana bar that tells you if you are above 100 mana or under 100 mana. Empty your mana bar, and while it's refilling, identify where the 100 mana threshold is. Mine is the continuation of the lower experience bar. If I draw a horizontal line from the bottom of my XP bar that would cross my mana bar, this is exactly where the 100 mana threshold would be. Yours might be somewhere else than mine. Memorize it, because you need to be able to tell at all times if you are above or under 100 mana, because this will influence what spell you cast next. The way I play this build is to start by casting Chain Lightning on a pack of mobs, to set them on fire and to chill them thanks to our Frostbolt and Firebolt enchantments. This increases both our DPS and survivability. More on that later. Then I cast Ball Lightning once, then I alternate between Chain Lightning and Ball Lightning while moving forward. One Chain Lightning, one Ball Lightning, one Chain Lightning, one Ball Lightning, rinse and repeat while kiting forward. Then, when there are enough enemies on screen, I group them up by teleporting to their face, having Raiment of the Infinite pixel pulling them. Now that they are up close, the Crackling Energy generated by Chain Lightning and Ball Lightning will appear directly at you, so you can afford to not cast Chain Lightning as frequently, like only one cast every 2 casts of Ball Lightning. Don't forget to move to pick up the Crackling Energy. You need to hit and run most of the time. Keep an eye on your mana bar from time to time to know if you can stand still or need to be on the move. Your mana bar is what dictates the order in which you can cast your spells. If you are close to 100 mana, cast Chain Lightning to generate both mana and Crackling Energy. If you are well above 100 mana, cast Ball Lightning more often. If you are under 100 mana, collect Crackling Energy or pixel pull a large number of enemies to refill. The mana management of this build is a game within the game, and I personally enjoy that a lot. The ceiling mastery of this build is very high. The sky is the limit. This build is a lot of fun for just that reason. Now, I won't lie to you, I am a better theory crafter than a player. You can play this build in a relaxing way by having an overkill setup on mana generation and watching a Netflix series while you speed farm. Or you can fine-tune the mana generation to just what is needed and master the most optimal spellcast order. Both ways are fun and enjoyable in their own right, and each way is made for the right player. Getting older ain't no good, friends. My wrists are a bit of an issue now, and my overall coordination is not as good as when I was on my 16 blasting RTS games. Deflating hot air balloons has permanently injured my wrists. I can't play a video game with the same accuracy than 2 decades ago. Anyway, back to gameplay. We didn't even touch the best part of the build, fighting elites. Every time you cross an elite pack, you want to pop your ultimate, Unstable Currents, to blow them up. This is where it gets interesting. During the 10 seconds of your ultimate, you don't have to cast Chain Lightning, and you don't have to collect Crackling Energy as much. You want to go full force on Ball Lightning. Every time you cast Ball Lightning, Unstable Current will cast for free either Charged Bolt, Lightning Spear, Ball Lightning or Chain Lightning. While the free casts of Charged Bolt won't do anything for you, the free casts of Chain Lightning will generate a lot of mana. The free casts of Ball Lightning will generate decent mana due to Wizard's Ball Lightning. And the free casts of Lightning Spear will generate some mana when they stun close enemies and increase your overall DPS due to Conjuration Mastery. RNG is by definition, well, random, but in my experience, when unstable current is up, you quickly go full mana while holding the ball lightning button. Elite fights are visually pleasing. You're gonna fill the entire screen with lightning shenanigans. Blow them up in a glorious way. To ensure that unstable currents is up every time we encounter an elite pack, we are running the Overflowing Energy key passive, which reduces our shock skill cooldowns, i.e. teleports, lightning spear and unstable currents, every time Crackling Energy connects. On top of that, Overflowing Energy and Mystical Teleports increase the number of enemy hits by Crackling Energy from 2 to 5. I tried running the Abundant Energy Legendary and concluded that it is not best in slot. It costs us an offensive Legendary slot for a not so great Legendary power. Reducing the cooldown of both Unstable Currents and Teleport is extremely important in this build. On top of Crackling Energy hits, the Enhanced Teleport node from our skill tree, paired with cooldown reduction on our helm and offhand, makes this build run very smooth. The elemental attunement will also help reset our teleport from times to times. To wrap up the gameplay section, I'll give you some tips and tricks about the Suppressor Elite affix. It is not so much of a hard counter here than it is in a pure Chain Lightning build. You have 3 ways to deal damage in this build: Ball Lightning, Chain Lightning and Crackling Energy. I have designed the build to have all of those 3 deal significant damage. Depending on how enemies are spread, use the most appropriate damage source for the situation. Also, try to pixel pull all elites together so that their suppressors rings won't prevent you from casting your spells. Next, don't stand next to walls. Position yourself with enough clearance from walls, either regular ones or summoned from the elites, before you cast Ball Lightning, otherwise they will disappear. This can be very annoying. Positioning is very important to play this build. Remember, don't smash your balls against the walls. If you enjoy what you've seen so far in this build guide, please consider hitting the like button and leaving a positive comment. It will tremendously help me to make the YouTube machine learning algorithm snowball this video. By doing that, you'll help me develop the channel so that I can allocate more resource into making videos like this one. This is free and only takes 10 seconds of your time. Thank you very much. On to offense. I have designed this build to have 3 different sources of damage: Chain Lightning, Ball Lightning and Crackling Energy. Damage-wise, you only need 3 specific build-enabling legendaries: the Unbroken Tether to have Chain Lightning sometimes bounce to 4 other targets, the Gravitational Legendary to increase Ball Lightning's damage by 25% and to have them orbit around you for 5 seconds, and the Ceaseless Conduit Paragon Legendary to increase Crackling Energy damage by around 120% in this build. The 25% chance to not consume a Crackling charge is not very relevant in this build, as you generate a lot of them anyway. Note that the Ceaseless Conduit is not included in the Mana Overkill version of the build. More about that later. Besides those 3 specific legendary power, the rest of the damage multipliers will benefit all 3 sources. Starting in the Paragon board, the Enchanter Glyph, the Elementalist, Elemental Balance and Polar Rime rare and magic nodes will increase your non-physical damage by a total of 177.4%. Then, the Frostbite Glyph, the Polar Rime and Frost's rare and magic nodes will increase your damage to chilled enemies by a total of 265.4%. Next, the Overwhelming, Incapacitate and Paralyzing rare and magic nodes plus the raiment of the infinite unique chest armor will increase your damage to stunned enemies by a total of 192.8%. On top of that, the control glyph will increase your damage to crowd control enemies, i.e. shield or stunned in this build, by 145.5%. Next, the flame feeder glyph and the cinders, rare and magic nodes will increase your damage to burning enemies by a total of 122.1%. Then, the imbiber glyph will increase our damage when we have more than 80% life by 106.9%. You can see if you are healthy by just looking at the outer circle of your health bar. If it is empty, you are below 80%. If it is full, you are healthy. And finally, damage to close enemies is increased by the prefix of our dagger and an affix on our raiment of the infinite unique chest armor for a total of 65.3%. We also have a little bit of damage to elites with the overwhelming rare and magic nodes for a total of 32%, and damage to slowed enemies as the last best in slot affix for our dagger for up to 35.3%. Of course, I did optimize each glyph by including them in the highest stat board: 54 willpower, 49 or 44 dexterity, and 70 intelligence. All those damage multipliers are additive into the same bucket. They make for a total of 845.3% versus trash mobs and 877.3% versus elites. Now let's factor in the external damage multipliers, starting with critical strike damage. Regular crit damage and lightning crit damage are additive together. On our gloves, weapon and rings, they provide a total of up to 183.4%. The destruction glyph adds 97% for a total of 280%. Then, our weapon and offhand gems add 24% versus crowd control for a total of 304.4%. This total is added to our base 150% for a grand total of 454.4%. Now let's factor in Devouring Blaze, the only multiplier when it comes to critical strike damage. 454.4 times 1.21 equals 549.824% total. The next external damage multiplier is our intelligence. It mostly comes from our Paragon common nodes, plus us being level 100, plus 1 best in slot roll on the weapon and chest armor, and to a lesser extent, the Altars of Lilith. That's a total of up to 748 intelligence, which means an increase in damage of 74.8%. And finally, the remaining external damage multipliers come from our gear, skill tree, glyphs, and hearts. The control legendary on our second ring provides 35%. One rank in glass cannon provides 6%. With around 5 lightning spears on average during unstable currents, the conjuration mastery provides 15%. Flame feeder glyph is 10%. Control glyph 20%. Destruction glyph 12%, and the Tal Rasha heart 36%. That makes for a total of around 3.31 more damage because of our multipliers. And now the grand total. 8.453 from the additive bucket times 5.498 from crits times 1.748 from intelligence times 3.31 from multipliers equals 268.9 general multiplier. For ball lightning, we multiply this number by 23% because of the 9 ranks and 25% because of the gravitational legendary. So that's a total of around 413.4 multiplier per zap. For Chain Lightning, that's 443.7 per bounce. And for Crackling Energy, I can't calculate it because I don't know the raw damage of a Crackling Energy zap. If anyone knows that number, please let me know in the comments. If we compare those numbers to the pure Chain Lightning speed farming build of my last video, we can see that each source of damage deals less damage, but the sum of all sources deal a lot more damage. Therefore, by just looking at the numbers, we can conclude that this ball lightning speed farming build is superior damage-wise to the Chain Lightning speed farming build. And this is even without factoring in the burst of damage we get from unstable currents. Needless to say, we are running the best Wrathful Heart of Season 1, the Barber. It provides unmatched AoE damage plus another multiplier. On to defense. In order to speed farm tier 70+, certain defensive breakpoints need to be reached. Having to include Raiment of the Infinite in the gear is a big setback in terms of defensive stats, because we lose a pure defensive chest armor item. This is big. Therefore, we have to get those stats somewhere else to comfortably speed farm without dying during our runs. That somewhere else is our amulet. In the absence of a defensive chest armor, that's the only place where we can get those. I choose to put the Disobedience Legendary there for a 45% increase of armor to make up for the armor loss on the 4th affix of Pants and what would have been a defensive chest. On top of that, we get two of the most important missing affixes from the chest armor, i.e. damage reduction from distant and damage reduction from close. The last missing affix, damage reduction from burning, will be rolled on our offhand. This is the only way to guarantee around the same amount of defensive stats than the pure Chain Lightning build from last video. If you are in doubt, let me tell you that you need those defensive breakpoints to speed farm tier 70+. If you die, you're going to waste a lot of time during your runs. And if you die too much, you might even fail your nightmare dungeons. You have to understand that in order to speed farm higher tiers, defense quickly becomes a limiting factor. You'll reach the desired breakpoints by running this setup that also includes the Ever-Living Legendary for 25% damage reduction from chilled enemies in this build. The Snow-Veiled Legendary on our helm provides crowd control immunity and extra armor. The Electrocution node from our skill tree provides 15% damage reduction from enemies you crit with shock skills. Mana Shield is another 21% damage reduction while in combat. Align the Elements is great for speed farming. The Heart of Revenge provides 20% damage reduction, and Smoldering Embers rare and magic nodes from the Paragon boards provide very much needed additional damage reduction from burning enemies. The extra remaining Paragon points when running the Mana Overkill setup allow to grab percent life increase that funnels nicely into our barriers. This, my friends, is the breakpoint you need to reach to comfortably speed farm tier 70+. A quick word on Lightning Spear. Among other things, it plays a defensive role by stunning ranged enemies, and it surprisingly reduces a lot of damage in a speed farming scenario. If you pack enough crit chance on your gear, it will have a decent uptime on this ranged damage mitigation thing. Now, let's analyze where this build lands in terms of Nightmare Dungeon tiers. After playing this build for a while, I find that it is best played in tier 75. This is where you will comfortably speed farm with good gear. Not great gear, nor perfect gear. With the good gear I have, 75 is the right tier. It is important to note that you have the damage to speed farm higher tiers. I went up to 79 and it felt okay in terms of damage, but survivability was the limiting factor. In these higher tiers, I had to play very carefully, which in my book doesn't qualify for speed farming. Now, in terms of speed, this build is slower than its pure chain lightning counterpart. Even though you have lower cooldown on teleport, the absence of flame shield and of a second movement legendary on the amulet make this build less swifty when it comes to zooming through dungeons. It still remains a very solid speed farming contender, in my opinion, due to pixel pooling with Raiment of the Infinite and the high burst of damage of unstable currents. Long story short, this speed farming setup lands in tier 75, and if you want to farm higher tiers, you can, but that's not speed farming anymore. For that reason, you will want to modify most of the build to include a lot more damage and less utility to venture into the Nightmare Dungeon push territory. We'll cover all the push builds on the channel after we are done with the speed farming series. Before we wrap up the video, let's look at how you can adapt this build to tailor-fit your playstyle and mana gear roles. Let's start with the mana overkill setup. That's the first link you're going to find in the description, and it is the best setup if you're trying the build for the first time. Now, if you're an experienced player and or have perfect mana rolls on your gear, let's look at how we can further optimize the build. We're going to make a few changes here and there, starting with the ceaseless conduit board on the Paragons. We're going to make the ceaseless conduit our fourth board, and we'll be looking to reach the bonus threshold of galvanic catalyst and conduit for extra crackling energy damage. We'll also grab the ceaseless conduit legendary node. The burning instinct becomes our fifth board, so we won't be able to get the bonus damage to burning and the bonus damage reduction from burning. To make this setup possible, we'll cut the Static Surge mana generation, the Reservoir max mana and max life, and the Resilience max life. Now, where does this land? You have 20 less max mana to work with and less mana generation from close stunned enemies on top of less max life, but you get a truckload more damage on your Crackling Energy. This setup is for experienced players that can perfectly manage the 100 mana threshold. This setup will reward those players with additional Crackling Energy damage. On the other hand, if you somehow struggle with the mana generation on the mana overkill setup, you can change the legendary power of your second ring for the Umbral or the Prodigy legendary power. Mix and match those combinations to reach the desired setup depending on how well you can play the build and the mana rolls you have on your gear. I truly hope you have enjoyed this second video in the speed farming series. Since you made it that far into the video, I am very interested in getting your feedback. I'd appreciate if you'd leave your thoughts in the comment section. Am I getting too much into details? Am I spending too much time into numbers, especially damaging ones? Am I missing important topics? You are one of the few that watch videos till the end, so you have the opportunity to make your voice heard. Help me shape up the content you would like to watch. If you assemble this build, I hope you have a blast playing it. Casting 1 billion lightning spells under Unstable Currents Ultimate is so visually pleasing. Now, the next build I have on the list is going to be the Blizzard speed farming build. This one is going to be a lot of fun. If you like the content of this channel and want to support my work, consider donating monthly on Patreon. Doing so will, in the long run, speed up the frequency at which I release new videos. This is Wismeril, signing off. I'll see you in Sanctuary. Wanderer.